A recursive function is a function that calls itself. Let's take a look at an example. Let's open up recursivefactorial.cpp. We'll copy that and paste it into our working project and double-click on it to open it in the editor. This is an example of a very simple and a very common example, actually, of a recursive function. A factorial in math is typically defined in recursive terms. It is the product of n times n minus 1 times n minus 2 all the way down to 1. So here, if you look at how this function works, it first tests if n is less than 2, and if it does, it just returns 1 because we know the answer to that. And if not, it goes ahead and it returns the factorial of n minus 1 times n. And in order to get the result of the factorial of n minus 1, it has to call itself, and it passes it n minus 1, and that will happen over and over until n is 1 or less than 2. So let's go ahead and run this by pressing the big green compile and run button, and you'll see that the factorial of 10 is 3,628,800. This actually called itself 10 times. Now there's a limit to how many times you can do this. Obviously there's the limit of the size of unsigned long integer, but there's also the limit of the amount of resources that are available on the computer. Every time you call a function, memory is allocated for the parameters, for any local variables, and for the return value and all the other function call overhead. If you do this recursively, it could happen many, many times, and all of those resources keep getting allocated and not deallocated until the last one is returned, and then all of those resources get deallocated. So this can be very inefficient. So if you have a choice between a recursive function and a function that works with a loop, oftentimes the loop will be a lot more efficient. For example, for this function, I could do it like this. Of course, that first line is going to stay the same. We can declare a variable for our result, and our starting place is n. And then there's a simple while loop. So for every value of n greater than 1, it will multiply the result by the decrement of n. So first it'll decrement n, and then it'll multiply the result for each one of those. And then it'll return result. We see that the result is exactly the same, 3,628,800. Now this version of the function takes up a lot less resources. It simply allocates all the stuff that it allocates for one function call, and it allocates one more long int, and then it sits there and loops and multiplies the result for a moment, and it returns that result. Whereas the recursive version allocates everything that's necessary for the entire function call as many times as the value of n. So C and C++ support recursive functions, but you should be careful. For problems that may require a lot of iterations, recursion can quickly use up a lot of resources. It's often better to find a different solution. Now let's delete the working file and run clean to get set up for the next lesson.